637, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Good morning to your friends, along with Johnny B, Joan Jones. I'm Dan Mandis. Matthew Hurtt is joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. Headline from the Daily Mail: be warned, a secret Democrat plot to sabotage Donald Trump is already underway. The Pete Hegseth witch hunt is just the beginning. Matthew Hurtt, always appreciate your analysis and perspective on these things. And so Josh Hammer writes not only about going after, of course, Pete Hegseth and his character. This goes back to, and we talked about how this is eerie similar to the situation with Justice Brett Kavanaugh, what they did to him. And they're suspecting that there's going to be even more of this as these cabinet confirmations go along. And the other thing that is happening, of course, as you know, is in states across America, they're also looking at providing funds, like in California, millions and millions of dollars to fend off anything that Donald Trump might want to do. So, I mean, I don't know, this feels a little unprecedented, but I guess my question is it?
Well, this is the worst kept secret in Washington, D.C., Dan. There is no argument that Democrats are going to do everything they can to stop Donald Trump's mandate, to stop Donald Trump's agenda in Washington. And this is the worst of the obstruction that we will have ever seen in Washington. It's why the slim House majority for Republicans is so important. It's why the Senate majority for Republicans is so important. And it is going to be up to the listeners of this program and grassroots Republicans and conservatives to make sure that we don't lose any votes from Republicans who are in tough seats when it comes to confirmation of Donald Trump's appointees or advancing the Trump agenda through Congress. All it's going to take is one or two votes in the House for some of these plans to be completely derailed, and the Democrats are going to create chaos and havoc in the headlines and in the mainstream media to put pressure on Republicans to back off from the mandate that voters delivered on November 5th.
It's interesting. I was talking to Congressman Tim Burchett on, I think it was Thursday or Friday. And I asked him, because of that slim majority in the House, but we also now have the majority in the Senate. And I asked him, does that put more pressure on someone like him, Tim Burchett, who, and I don't know if you know anything about him, is a Eastern Tennessee congressman. And he said it does put more pressure on him because he is somebody who always votes his conscience, and he's always voting down some of these spending bills. And he said that, yeah, now that we have the Senate, then there's more pressure on the House and people like him who tend to be, one of those folks that he will not just go along to get along. He will vote down a spending bill if he needs to, and he'll go against the grain of the Republicans. And so when you look at the House majority and how it is slim, I mean, do you think they're going to be able to get as much done as Donald Trump has promised?
Well, I know, and I love Tim Burchett. I've known Tim since he was in the state Senate there in Nashville, and he's a great representative. I saw him last week. What I'll say is there are two kinds of bills that will come through Congress. There are bills that include spending, and conservatives, where we can, should hold the Trump administration accountable on those instances, because the Republican platform is let's rein in the size and scope of government. Donald Trump's platform is to rein in the size and scope of government. That is what DOGE was established to do, to rein in the size of government. And I think a lot of Donald Trump's agenda is going to include strategic cuts to programs and to government organizations and entities and departments. But on the other side of that, the second kind of piece of legislation that will come through will be things that will just broadly advance the Trump agenda. Those may not have costs affiliated with them, or they may have a reduction in costs affiliated with them. And on those points, we should move straight ahead. I don't think there is much overlap in elements of the Trump agenda where he would increase spending, where he couldn't just move resources around. The Democrats and Joe Biden created 87,000 new IRS agents. There's no reason why we couldn't move some of those resources. There's a lot of sleight of hand that goes on in Nashville and in Washington with your tax dollars, and it's important for us to move those dollars from a left-wing spending proposal over to something that advances the Trump agenda.
642 Nashville's Morning News on WTN. Matthew Hurtt is joining us. So day one, we all know that presidents, especially Joe Biden, like to utilize executive orders. Do you think that Trump, knowing what we know now about Donald Trump and what we've experienced with Joe Biden, do you think that Trump will issue more executive orders than he did the first time around, seeing what happened in the last 4 years?
I think to undo a lot of what has happened in Washington over the last 20 or 30 years, it's going to take executive action. Congress has abdicated much of its authority. I think we're seeing this in the nominations. People like Linda McMahon at Department of Education and other places. We're going to see a lot of really good stuff come from the Trump White House, and he's going to be ready on day one. Some of those will be executive actions. Some of those are going to play out in the administrative actions of the people he is nominating and those who will make it through Senate confirmation. And so it's important to look at all of what's available, all of what's on the table, so long as what it does is it returns us to the Constitution and eliminates some of the unnecessary power and overreach that we've seen in Congress and in the bureaucratic state that exists right here where I live in Arlington.
Coming up, I'm going to ask you a little bit about what happened over the weekend, the fall of Bashar al-Assad, Syria, and I explained a little bit as to what's going on there. But to me, there's a couple of big stories here. Number one, obviously, the foreign policy implications, the situation with ISIS and al-Qaeda, this organization, this group that has taken over Syria, has ties to both of those terrorist organizations. But one of the things that Joe Biden said is that they're going to rebuild Syria. Now, we just spent yet another $725 million going to Ukraine. He announced, I think it was last week or the week before, we're going to send $1 billion to Angola. So it seems like Joe Biden, Matthew, is doing a number of things heading out the door. Number one, spending a lot of money on foreign policy. That's number one. Number two, of course, is, as you know, he went in and he is trying to get some protections for federal employees to be able to work from home. And Trump has been saying, no, I want these people to get their butts back into the office. There is a big conversation about one guy working from home who posted on social media that he was working in the bubble bath. And so that sort of, really made that conversation become a little more intriguing to a lot of folks because they're saying, really? Our taxpayer dollars are being utilized so that people can stay home and do their job in the bubble bath. And so it just seems like on the way out the door, Joe Biden is doing whatever he can to make it a rocky launch for the Trump administration.
Well, Dan, I'm in the bubble bath right now. No,
TMI.
I've been in the office for about an hour. And this is a serious question. Are some people able to do their jobs and complete their work in the period of time over the span of the week, say the traditional 40-hour work week? Those individuals who are able to do that, many in the private sector, should be, those are negotiations with their employers. This is a serious situation where there are individuals who are openly and publicly flouting their responsibility to the taxpayer. Right now, Dan, I work for an organization that survives on donations. I couldn't imagine a situation where I thought it would be acceptable for me to not do the work that I'm tasked to do, much less a situation where we as taxpayers are not, these aren't donations to the federal government. We are compelled to give our tax dollars to the federal government, and to have tens of thousands or perhaps even hundreds of thousands of employees who are disrespecting the compelled gifts, I use that term lightly, of the taxpayer to execute the job of their responsibilities is absolutely outrageous. And those individuals should be held accountable, and they should either be let go or returned to their industry and hiring somebody who will do the job, or in the event that those jobs weren't even necessary, just don't backfill the job. A lot of times there'll be an opening that'll exist for some time, and if the job's getting done without that person on the payroll, then let's just not have that person come back to work, and let's not fill the role.
This morning, Matthew, I've been playing audio from the interview that Trump had with Kirsten Welker. I've been playing all kinds of audio bites, but just give me your thoughts on, number one, why he decided to do it, and your thoughts on the actual interview.
I think a president like Donald Trump is going to be a president for everyone. I think that he uses traditional and non-traditional communication in media channels to make that case. I watched bits and pieces of the interview. I thought he did very well in answering the questions. It was obvious that she hadn't learned anything from the election. And this is a Donald Trump and a J.D. Vance who are going to go on offense to claw back the credibility from the mainstream media. And we know a majority of Americans don't trust the mainstream media. And so for Donald Trump to go there and say, and to answer as strongly as he did on some of those questions, I think is a very great thing. And I think it is just one of the many ways he's going to communicate to the American people elements of his agenda. And I think that's a good thing.
Didn't feel like he needed to go on Meet the Press. It didn't feel like he needed to speak to Kirsten Welker. I mean, he's already been nominated. He's already won the election, I should say. And so, to me, I think that when I watched the entire interview, which I have, it seemed to me like he was on there to prove a point. And that point was that he can make it through an hour and 15-minute long interview and not take the bait of a mainstream media journalist like Kirsten Welker, who was baiting him. And he handled all of it with style and grace and class, even though she was, in my opinion, combative. Not as combative as I've seen her in the past, but she was combative. And he was a leader. He took it all in stride. He answered the questions. And I thought that he did really well. And to me, that was a defeat for Kirsten Welker.
You're absolutely right, Dan. This is something where Donald Trump can sit through. He sat through a 3-hour conversation with Joe Rogan that was wide-ranging before the election. This guy has the stamina and the knowledge to sit in an hour or 2 hours or 3-hour conversation to make strong points about what he believes is his agenda and what he plans to do. And I think it was sort of a victory lap, to put it another way. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited about those opportunities for him to go and make the case to what I would consider non-traditional audiences, or the people who consume the information, the lies and half-truths and misrepresentations of the incoming Trump administration, to where he can go and make the case and maybe peel people off and bring people over to our side. It's a tremendous opportunity, and he's great for doing it.
All right, Matthew, how can people find you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter and X at Matthew Hurtt, MatthewHurtt.